When it comes to film franchises, the biggest juggernauts today have got to be the Marvel films and Star Wars and stuff like that. They're big, they're expensive, and as long as people keep going to see them, they'll keep making them. Sometimes I wonder, what is the biggest franchise that's still going? Well, it's tough to say. It depends on your definition of big. Is it box office results? Is it how many years it's been going on since the first installment? But I like to think of it as simply the number of films. Godzilla is a contender with 29 live action features from Japan and 33, including the American ones, plus the upcoming Godzilla vs. Kong, and a lot more if you count every film in the Toho monster universe. James Bond has a total of 25, counting the new one, and 27 if you count the unofficial versions. Of course, this number depends if you factor in if the continuity has been rebooted, such as the case with Godzilla with many different timelines, or if you consider an actor being recasted, such as the case with James Bond, though with Bond it hardly seems to matter, as they all seem to be considered one ongoing universe, especially since the actor Desmond Llewellyn, who played Q in 17 of them, helps, connect it all. But now, let's talk about the biggest franchises that aren't quite as famous. Yeah, big but not famous. Very popular at one time, but now past their prime. Ones that may still continue in some form, but the public is not talking about them anywhere near as much as Marvel and Star Wars. Sherlock Holmes. Okay, so the character, based on the books of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, has been featured in more movies than any other character according to the Guinness World Records. Over 200 movies, but that probably exceeds our criteria. It's too broad in scope. When I think franchise, I think of a series of films that people like to think of in a package that represents a certain lineage or an era. With this, I think a good example of a Sherlock Holmes series would be the 14 films from 1939 to 1946 that all starred Basil Rathbone as Holmes and Nigel Bruce as Watson. They're all connected by those same two actors and presumably part of the same continuity. Imagine when this was current, you'd say, hey, let's go see that new Sherlock Holmes picture. Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce, they're at it again. Same way today you'd think of Vin Diesel in Fast and the Furious, like, oh, that guy's going to be in these movies till the end of time. I think back to these older franchises and wonder, what would it have been like to talk about that when it was a big thing? There will probably be more Sherlock Holmes movies. I mean, it wasn't too long ago when they made two starring Robert Downey Jr., but for it to get back the same momentum as it did with Rathbone and Bruce, it has a long way to go. Carry On was a comedy series with 31 films to its credit from 1958 to 1992. That's pretty impressive, and I'm shocked I've never even heard of it. Probably because it's from the UK and the US we didn't get a lot of the same things. They just didn't cross over for whatever reason. But damn, this franchise certainly did carry on. Producer Peter Rogers and director Gerald Thomas made all 31 films. They didn't repeat the same characters, but the same actors would appear in most of the films, with Kenneth Williams, I think, holding the record at appearing in 26 Carry On films. I would say that's a pretty big franchise that's now dead, except for the fact that a reboot is in the works or possibly released by the time you see this video. It seems the popularity of Carry On is still alive enough, so I wouldn't exactly consider this a forgotten franchise. Zatoichi is the story of a blind but highly skilled swordsman. There are 26 films in the original series from 1962 to 89. Plus, if you count a few contemporary installments, the number is 29. Actor Shintaro Katsu played the title role in 26 films. Wow, 26. That's a pretty big franchise, but not forgotten since it still has existed in modern history. So let's talk about Tarzan. This is one I've always thought of as a contender, though it's not really forgotten. I think it's just underestimated. There's been enough modern Tarzan movies to keep the character in the public memory, but when you look back at how big of a franchise of films Tarzan was, it's absolutely stunning. There were about 37 authorized live-action films. Johnny Weissmuller played Tarzan 12 times total from 1932 to 1948. Lex Barker played him 5 times from 1949 to 51. Gordon Scott played him 6 times from 1955 to 60. This is very much like James Bond. It was a long-running series spanning decades in which they kept recasting the actor. But unlike Bond, Tarzan has lost its momentum. At this juncture in time, there exists no continually running Tarzan feature film series of any kind. But we're digging deeper. We're getting down to the heart of it. What I'm mostly curious about is what franchises are the biggest yet totally forgotten. The criteria that we're looking for is that the franchise can't have any new live-action feature film installment, can't have any new reboots or anything in the past 25 years or more. I'll just set it there. It had to have been a long-running series spanning more than one decade with more than 15 films to its credit and more than 5 with the same actor. So, okay, here we go. Jungle Jim. Very similar to Tarzan, it had 16 films made between 1948 to 1955. Johnny Weissmuller played Jungle Jim in all 16 of them. Pretty impressive, but I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a big Jungle Jim fan today. Andy Hardy, likewise, had 16 films spanning 1937 to 58. It was a comedy series starring Mickey Rooney as the title character, having played him in all 16. I can't think of many comedy actors today to make it that far. He was truly a legend, but do you hear anybody talking about Andy Hardy today? Not really. Lone Wolf. It was the story of a jewel thief turned private detective. Like many of these old franchises, it was based on a series of books. The film series consisted of 24 films that ran from 1917 to 49. That's, of course, if you count the silent versions. Warren Williams played him 9 times, and Eric Blore played his butler and assistant 11 times. Nowadays, if you Google Lone Wolf, you're going to get the manga. The original Lone Wolf is sure feeling pretty lonely. Bulldog Drummond was about a war veteran who becomes bored with civilian life, so he goes on all these different adventures. There were 24 films from 1922 to 69. John Howard played him 7 times. But is anyone talking about it now? I don't know. Let me know when they do a Bulldog Drummond reboot. Boston Blackie. Sounds a lot like Lone Wolf because it's a jewel thief who becomes a detective. I'll let you know more when I actually watch this, but it's not going to be anytime soon because there's 25 films between 1918 to 1949. Chester Morris played the character 14 times. And aside from a quick reference in the show Mad Men, I don't see many people talking about this. Blondie was a series based on a comic strip about a small-town family. There were 28 films from 1938 to 1950. The 2 actors, Arthur Lake and Penny Singleton, played the main characters, Dagwood and Blondie. These 2 were quite the pair, having played the roles together for all 28 films. Wow, that must be a record. Not for the number of films in a franchise, but for having the same actors in every single one of them. I'm not sure if it's the record, but it's got to be up there, as far as franchises that are forgotten. Plus, I know I said I'm only counting feature films for simplicity, but it's worth noting they also played the characters in a radio show, and Arthur Lake did the TV version. Lake and Singleton are your grand champions. But the question here is, what's the biggest forgotten film franchise? The one with the largest number of films to have completely dropped off the planet. I don't pretend to know the answer, but from what I was able to gather, the biggest that I know of must have been Charlie Chan. I can't even count how many Charlie Chan films there are. It seems there's 44 that are officially recognized as part of the series, but count up all the other adaptations of the character and you might as well be counting every movie that has Dracula in it. So it's like Sherlock Holmes, where it's just too broad of a scope. But just looking at that official series of 44 films, the earliest one was in 1926, and aside from some false starts, there hasn't been a new one since 1981. But that was a long run. Warner Oland played him 16 times, Sidney Toller played him 22 times, Roland Winters played him 6 times, Key Luke played Lee Chan 11 times, 7 times opposite Oland, and James Bond doesn't even come close to Charlie Chan. But who's talking about Charlie Chan? Nobody. That's what I call a big franchise, and one that's so forgotten I never even gave it any attention myself. I've never seen a single one. But that's not to say I haven't looked into it, and what I found is that it's very unfortunate about this series is that it played up racial stereotypes. So discontinuing it may have been for the best. But for historical sake, it's good to look back at some of these franchises just to remember what used to be popular and see how the tides have shifted. It's hard to imagine a day when Marvel and Star Wars will be forgotten, but many decades into the future, it might be possible.